that each of them wanted domestic coal. Well, obviously, the solution had to be that the scarcity must be shared, and that is actually what the government did. After a bit of toing and froing and some negotiation with state governments, it finally came to an agreement that older plants will keep getting domestic coal in the way they used to, but all the new capacity will get a certain percentage guaranteed domestic coal, and the rest would be imported, of course, at a higher price. Now, the interesting thing is that in March of this year, there were 78,000 megawatts of capacity that were in the process. Either they'd been commissioned and didn't have fuel supply agreements, or they were going to be commissioned by the year 2015 and didn't have fuel supply agreements. Because of the resolution of this problem, now, out of that 78,000, about 70,000 actually have fuel supply agreements. This means from a banker's point of view, the people who are lending to these plants know that somehow you're not going to have a situation where there's no coal. It may be that the power is going to be more expensive, but the fact of the matter is that power is desperately short, and people are using diesel and so on, which is much more expensive than any increase that would occur in the power tariff. You know, frankly, we shouldn't have taken a year to resolve this problem, but you know, whenever you're making a change from an earlier system to a new system, these kinds of problems do come up. Underlying this, of course, is the fundamental problem: why are we not achieving our targets of coal production? And there you have a whole lot of issues on environmental clearances, forest clearances, etc., which we are also actually trying to resolve. So I'm just giving this as one example that, you know, if we had continued to grow at 5%, we would not have been investing that much in power, and the growth of coal would have been enough to sustain a growth rate of 5%. When the growth rate went to 9%, and when a lot of people felt that it can be 9% or 8% for the next 20 years, the need to invest in power increased hugely. And the good news is that the generation investment did take place, but the investment in the fuel supply didn't take place, and then we ran into a brick wall. I think we should recognize that, you know, what this demonstrates is that on the one hand, the global economy is going to normalize. Those who may have feared that the global economy is going to self-destruct and collapse and so on, I think the current assessment is that the global situation is beginning to turn around. You see that in what is happening to our own exports, because while our domestic economy is not yet picked up, exports are beginning to pick up. So it's not as if the world is going to go into a high growth mode very suddenly, but the conventional view today is that the year 2014 will be distinctly better for the global economy than the year 2013, and we will of course benefit from that. We must also recognize that just as there are global cycles, there are domestic cycles, and I think we are trying to address these problems. Of course, we are now entering into an election mode when this is not usually the best time to think clearly about economic policy. You will get a lot of political noise for the next 4 or 5 months, but underneath that, I think people are aware of what needs to be done. So my guess would be that although we will have the inevitable uncertainty of a general election, post the general election, whatever government is in power, I think the perception that India should be getting up to between 7.5% and 8%, this was pretty universal. And I believe that the aspirational pressure, political leaders have realized that the people who vote them to power have a sense that India can do a lot better than we've done in the last 2 years. We demonstrated that in the previous 8 years, and people will want to get back to that growth rate. And I think that India can do it, and you will see that it won't take very long. Once the preoccupation with an election is over, for some basic sensible policies to be put in place. What are those policies? Well, clearly, infrastructure and the management of the energy economy is one of the most important things. It requires a lot of investment. As I've said, we have had some luck in bringing in the private sector. In some areas there have been problems, and those problems are actually partly because the financial situation has also tightened. So many people who invested or took up projects in the infrastructure space, believing that they would be able to get finance to complete these projects, etc., have run into two problems. One is the regulatory problems, the lack of certainty and a bit too much of delay in getting regulatory clearances. Now the government is trying to resolve that by this Cabinet Committee on Investment, which has actually taken a large number of decisions, and I think as that builds up, the regulatory side will be taken care of. But you know, even when the regulatory side is taken care of, if people are finding that on the financial side they're not getting enough support, because the global financial situation has deteriorated, then removing the regulatory hurdles doesn't get investment moving. So we need to concentrate on setting right the financial environment in which these projects can actually take off. I think Mr. Subramaniam earlier talked about the importance of bank finance for MSMEs. I think that's very, very important. So really, on the one hand, there's the issue of getting the financing constraint for infrastructure handled. On the other hand, there's the issue of making sure that small and medium enterprises get an adequate amount of finance. I mean, I think that one of the major concerns that anybody should have about India is that, you know, we have grown quite rapidly for the previous 8 years or 9 years, even if you include the slowdown of the last year and this year. It's been a pretty good growth rate. But there is a concern that we're not generating as much employment as we should. And frankly, given the growth of the younger age population, given the fact that the younger age population is much more educated, given the fact that urbanization is increasing, so this is not a demographic group whose aspirations are going to be resolved simply by creating a lot of low-level jobs in rural areas. I think they are expecting to see a much faster pace of urbanization, which is already happening, and they're expecting to see the kinds of jobs that are associated with that. And frankly, those jobs can come if manufacturing takes off, and within that, if a lot of medium and small industries expand and increase employment. So that is quite clearly something that we have to do. But I would only say that, you know, while manufacturing needs finance, it also needs infrastructure. So I would say that if I had to think of two things that we need to do for manufacturing to do well, it is one, provide them with good quality infrastructure. That means good roads, logistical connections, seamless business, regulatory environment, improving the ease of doing business, which is a very, very important thing, and most of all, good quality power. I mean, big industries, big capital-intensive industries, do not depend upon utilities for power. They produce their own power. So it becomes just a captive in-house operation. It is the small and medium, and when I say small, I don't mean tiny. I mean, even somebody with a turnover of 100 crores or a turnover of 200 crores should not be expected to be also running a power station. So therefore, frankly, and this is something we say to chief ministers, because remember, the supply of electricity is dominantly a state government issue. And I feel that in the years ahead, if any state government sort of wants to have a strategy for accelerating the creation of jobs, it should have a strategy for making available high quality power in adequate quantities. It is not, in my view, that important for the power to be cheap. The truth of the matter is that the pretense that you can provide cheap power only saddles the electricity board and makes it impossible for them to provide an adequate quantity. which actually forces people into diesel generation, which is 3 times more expensive. So what you need is our political process has got to make people understand that you have to pay for power. It's not cheap. But it is your right to expect uninterrupted power supply. You should not be having long power cuts, unscheduled power cuts, etc., etc. And these two things are really going to be critical. I would say that in the management of the energy economy, and I'm now talking about power, coal, gas, petroleum, it is absolutely vital for us to understand that we are an energy deficient, energy deficit country. We're going to be having to import more and more of energy. We're actually importing more and more of coal. So it's not that we're only importing petroleum. I mean, the present position is we're importing petroleum, 80% is imported. We're importing coal, and by the end of another 5 years, almost 20% of our coal supply will be imported. We're importing natural gas, about 30% of our supply. So in all of these areas, the imported price is much higher than the price we've got used to. So frankly, this is tough, and I don't expect that in a run-up to a general election, it's going to be very easy for governments to address this problem. But you know, it's the job of the Planning Commission to lay out the framework for the years ahead. So it doesn't matter what happens the next month, next 2 months, next 3 months. There is no story. There's no story for successful growth in India which is not anchored in a credible story for energy management. And you know, if we want to manage energy, what do we want to do? We want to reduce energy demand to move as quickly as possible to energy efficient technologies which reduce energy demand. And you know, from a consumer point of view, that means that energy prices should be high. Nobody is going to be doing energy efficiency if energy is kept cheap. And on the supply side, we want to increase the supply of energy. And if you want to increase the supply of anything, you have to basically offer investors a better return. Now you can avoid this for a day, you can avoid this for a week, you can avoid this for a month, even 6 months. But you know, when you start avoiding it for years, you're really writing a story of steady inability to achieve what is a possible goal. And I think we have in the plan emphasized this very considerably. And the most important thing is that all these decisions are really taken at the state levels. So the awareness of what is a viable, sensible energy policy is something that universities should contribute to, thinking communities should contribute to, press and media should contribute to, but I think that it can be done. And by the way, we have taken a number of steps in that direction. Compared to the last year, over the last year, I mean, gasoline, petrol prices have been deregulated, diesel prices are being steadily adjusted upward, cooking gas has been increased. So I think it's not as if it's not possible, but this is one part of it. The other part is actually transport infrastructure. Huge need. If we want to grow at 8%, we need much better roads and railways. In fact, from the point of view of energy efficiency and also from the point of view of climate change, we need to shift a much larger portion of our freight from roads to railways. And I mean, this basically also requires accepting the financial viability of railway operation. And the present situation really is that, you know, railways are heavily burdened. People don't realize it. They're heavily burdened by subsidizing passenger traffic. You know, most people are not aware that the total subsidy on passenger traffic of Indian Railways is over 20,000 crores. I'm not saying, by the way, that there should be no subsidy. I mean, you know, everywhere in the world, the railways get subsidized on passenger traffic. But should it be 20,000 crores? Because the present position is that the railways are not able to finance, to complete the projects that they have ongoing because they don't have resources. And of course, the simple solution is to say the government should provide them resources. But you know, the government has infrastructure needs, the government has health expenditure needs, the government has education expenditure needs. So these are actually going to be matters of choosing. And really, as we look ahead, if we can make a lot of sensible decisions on these grounds, I think we have all the other things needed to get back to high growth. We have a high rate of savings, a very dynamic private sector, which all across the country is capable of doing a lot of investments and is keen to do a lot of investment. If we can control the government's fiscal deficit, which the finance minister has very firmly said he intends to do, we would actually relieve